If you've never seen a grown Swiss man bereaved over a copper pot, you've missed a sight. Fritz Brenner came into the office at 11:10 with his dignity listing to starboard and his white apron held as if it might fly away, and announced to me in the empty room that an outrage had been committed. He didn't announce it to Nero Wolfe. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, lording over them like he'd invented chlorophyll. Visiting hours run till 11, and after a morning among those assertive ladies, he comes down, drinks beer, and faces the worst of humanity with something like patience. 11:10 is the no man's land, when only Fritz, me, and the house are supposed to be alive. "Mr. Goodwin," Fritz said, and lowered his voice for tragedy. "It is polished." There are half a dozen items in the brownstone that can be "it" in Fritz's language, and each of them has a first name and a current grievance. I spun my chair. "Who is polished?" "The goose." He shut his eyes at the word. "Copper, the big oval. It is, so wrong. It is wrong to touch it, to change it. Mr. Goodwin, you come. When Fritz says you come, because it's either that or find yourself eating penance in a stew later." I followed him to the kitchen, which, if you don't know, our setup is Fritz's sanctuary, the way the plant rooms are Wolfe's. The goose had pride of place on its hook above the block. It was the largest copper in the house, an oval made to hold a fat bird and keep its dignity. It was now gleaming like a senator's campaign promise. The copper caught the light and threw it back at me in blinding, shameful waves. Fritz looked at it and flinched. "You see? This is not my hand. I would never. The patina is part of the seasoning. You do not scrub memory away from a pot." I admit I stared with all the awe the situation merited. I've seen pots polished in my time. I've even done crime scene cleanups that left less shine. There wasn't a thumbprint on it. There wasn't a whisper. Even the hook looked scoured. "You didn't do it," I said. "Never. I've never made that pot bare in 20 years. The roast goose is better for what it has known. The surface, Mr. Goodwin, forgive me. You're not a cook. The surface has a voice, and now it has been made dumb. Maybe it got embarrassed and did itself." He made a noise that could curdle cream. "Someone came. While I slept, or worse, someone under this roof. If Theodore touched it, I will. Theodore wouldn't touch your copper if it were weighted with gold ingots. And he'd have to leave his botanicals to do it." I moved closer. Fritz was right. It wasn't just polished. It was too polished. I've seen military brass that didn't aspire to this. "Anything else?" I went through everything. He gestured helplessly. "The knives, no. The steel and the stones have not been moved. The oils are where I left them. The spices..." He stopped, and I watched him reach, as carefully as a man lifting a sleeping child, and pick up one of the jars. He unthreaded the lid, tilted it, sniffed. The jar went back. He tried another. He did not like what he found, but it was not a robbery. It was something subtler, which is worse, because subtle makes a man like Fritz feel foolish. "The saffron," he said low. "Possibly someone looked. Or I am, how you say, phantom chased." "Ghost chased," I said. "And the outside door?" "Locked at midnight." He was himself enough to bristle. "You asked me if I locked my kitchen? Archie, my mother raised me properly, but I went to the back door again at 7. Still locked. And the front and the second floor windows. I prompted, the routine soothing us both. No signs of tampering." He folded his arms. "There is your routine. There is my pot. The routine can go to the devil. You want me to tell Wolfe?" He winced. "No," he said, and then, "Yes, but do not let him say I'm hysterical. He will say I'm hysterical." "Naturally." I went to the wall phone and called upstairs, which in our house is not for the timid. The phone on the plant room's table sits near enough to the spray to feel mist on its lip. Wolfe hates it ringing when he's with the orchids, as he hates uninvited guests and tinned soup. I got Theodore, who was born with a permanent sigh. And he relayed. Wolfe arrived at 11:30 on the dot, stomping his way past the hat rack and depositing his bulk in the kitchen as if the tiles belonged to him, too. He never hastens, but he can project speed when he's irritated. He wore his yellow shirt that brings out the suggestion he's part galleon. He stopped at the sight of the goose, lifted his lids half an inch, and then moved his eyes to Fritz. "Yes," he said, like the tribunal. Fritz swallowed. He told it straight, because you don't add sauce for Wolfe. Wolfe listened with the expression he uses for people who claim they have poltergeists and for tax men. He looked at me, and at the pot again. He didn't touch it. Wolfe doesn't touch a mystery before it's ready. "It is improbable," he said finally. "No one entered in the night. Fred arrived at 6:15 and was in the front room to dust until you came down. Archie at 8. Theodore has not been out of the plant rooms. You do not polish a copper pan with a gesture. It takes time. If one of us had time for that, we should be ashamed of how we keep our hours." "Then someone came earlier," Fritz challenged. "Yesterday afternoon, while I was at the fishmonger." "You leave the house unattended," Wolfe said. "For 30 minutes," Fritz said stiffly, "with the oven warming, and you in the house." "I do not patrol against impiety," Wolfe murmured. "Perhaps I should." He moved his eyes to the hook. "There is no theft. We did not suffer. We will not tell the police that our pot is too bright. We will—" "Mr. Wolfe," Fritz interrupted, "and it takes real distress to do that. It is not the brightness. It is that someone was in my kitchen and touched what is mine. It is a violation." Wolfe's face did something most wouldn't notice, but that I get paid to. He softened around the eyes. It was almost chivalry. "I acknowledge it," he said. "Someone intruded, if only inattention. To polish a pan is to make a mark by removing marks. An odd instinct in a thief." "Very well. Archie, make a note. The goose was polished by an idiot." "Noted. And Fritz, calm your bile. I will consider. Meanwhile, I will have my beer at 12 intact, and Solyanka at 1, unless the world has been sterilized of that too." He turned and went, leaving Fritz teetering between gratitude and fury. I followed Wolfe back to the office. When he settled in his chair and stretched, he had what I can only call a glint. That meant gears turning. Whenever gears turn in that head without a case to eat, I get nervous, because I'm liable to be appointed raw ingredient. "You going to consider loudly?" I asked. "Phooey," he said, and closed his eyes. At 12, he had his beer, unharmed, and at 1 he got Fritz's Solyanka with a face like an accusation. Fritz served it like an apology. Between mouthfuls, Wolfe lectured the soup on the importance of memory and food, for which the soup did not answer, perhaps out of shock. At 2:10, the doorbell rang. I put down the Gazette, slid my feet to the floor, and went out to face whoever was interrupting digestion. She said her name was Regina Blake, and showed me a card that had no more to say than that. She also had the kind of hat that says a woman knows where to shop, and eyes the color of a blue steel knife. She carried no handbag. When women come without cargo, it's either love or trouble. Considering my line of work, I always bet trouble. "I believe Mr. Wolfe receives clients," she said, "and perhaps he receives benefactors." "We prefer clients," I told her. "They pay and leave. May I ask who sent you?" "Felix Kurian," she said. "Felix Kurian runs Rustermann's. If there's a restaurant that deserves its reputation without having to hire it, that's Rustermann's. Felix and Wolfe trade tributaries. Dishes, wines, gossip, and sometimes the river floods into business." I ushered her in and gave her the client chair opposite Wolfe's desk, which didn't complain. I announced her and Felix, which is like presenting a rabbit with the lettuce farmer's endorsement. "Felix," Wolfe said, interested despite himself. "We must be polite. Miss or Mrs. Blake?" "Miss," she said. She studied Wolfe as if he might get up and applaud that, but not today. Mr. Wolfe, I won't waste you. I direct the Blake Fund. We support vocational programs, domestic arts, principally, kitchens for schools and settlement houses. Tomorrow we are to host a tasting for donors at one of our training kitchens on East 78th. Last night someone scrubbed that kitchen to the bones. My staff found it at 9 this morning. It is... She glanced at me. Forgive the phrase. Too clean. Wolfe's eyelids went up a notch. His head did not move. The floors? Everything. The ranges, with the trays out. The shelves wiped down, the copper polished, the cutting boards bleached, the towels laundered and folded. It is not our work. It is not our schedule. We do not do deep cleaning on a Sunday night. We could not have. We did not. Who has keys? I asked. A dozen, perhaps. The director, the chef instructor, 3 staff, me, the concierge, and 2 volunteers who hold keys for deliveries. And the landlord has a pass key. The back door was locked this morning. The windows as well. Nothing is missing. Then why are you here? Wolfe asked, instead of in a hardware store buying a red carpet to lay for the saint who visited you. Her mouth twitched. I like people who fight the twitch. Because, she said, our recipe cards for tomorrow's tasting were in a drawer in the director's office that locks. The lock is intact. The drawer is intact. The cards were there Friday. This morning they were present, but I am told that pages have been removed and replaced. The chef says the hand that handled them wore gloves. He says someone removed something and left it the way a careful burglar leaves a note. And yet nothing is missing. There is also the matter of the spice blends we were to use, she added. They are present, but Chef Mateo says 1 jar smells wrong. He won't use it. He says someone has touched what is his. He is like your Fritz, perhaps. My eyes went to Wolfe. His expression did a lazy turn. Who told you about Fritz? Mr. Currian. She folded her hands. Mr. Currian told me a cook, Luke, Fritz, had found his copper too bright, and that Mr. Wolfe lives in a house where the kitchen is considered a realm. Mr. Currian is a friend and a donor. He advises me when I'm about to consult a man who will refuse me on principle. On principle? Wolfe echoed. You decline unpleasantness, she said. That is the legend. You prefer your cases like your sauces, reduced and subtle. This is dishwater. It is beneath you. I am flattered that an entreaty includes a critique, Wolfe said. What do you want? I want discretion, she said, and speed. We cannot have the donors in our kitchen when I suspect that someone with a key used it to make me look like a fool. We also cannot call the police and announce to our patrons that their worthy cause is under criminal investigation for hygiene. Chef Mateo says someone is stealing. I do not know what. I do not know why, but I know when that kitchen is scrubbing itself, the truth is being erased. You are emphatic, Wolfe said. She looked at him level. I am committed. It is not a fashionable cause, Mr. Wolfe. It is pots and pans and women learning to feed their children. But men have made fortunes telling you cuisine is art. Art must have its saints too. We do our work with civility and soap, not, with your leave, subterfuge. You will have my leave when you pay for it, he said. He breathed. Do you know who has motive? Who hates you enough to make your kitchen spotless? Yes, she said. She did not pause. She is one of those women. 6 men and women. Our director's contract is up. Our chef is volatile. A rival foundation would be happy if we embarrass ourselves at the tasting. A journalist has been calling, and a former student threatened to make a scene if we did not use her recipes. That is the list I assemble while you count your beer bottles. Archie, Wolfe said. A pencil. I got it. He told me to write. Blake Fund Training Kitchen. Unwarranted spotless cleaning overnight. Recipe cards altered. Spices tampered. Access, 12 keys. Suspects, director, chef, rival fund, journalist, former student. He let out a little breath through his nose that made the hair on my nape sit up and salute. "Miss Blake, your urgency is taken. Why me?" "Felix said you would grasp that cleanliness can be hostile." Her tone had softened. "He also said that Mr. Wolfe regards the sanctity of a kitchen the way a judge regards his bench. He said if anyone could tell me whether this is prank or sabotage, it is you." Wolfe's hand made a small circle in the air, the way a conductor brings up a section he likes. "Felix is a flatterer, but not a liar. It is possible. It is..." He rested his head back and shut his eyes for the luxury of thinking in front of an audience. "You have replaced the locks." "We cannot," she said. "Not before tomorrow." "Then you want an assurance. You want your donors to eat without poison and without scandal. You want to know by tonight whether anyone intends you harm that will rise above gossip." "Yes, and you will pay for that assurance." "Yes." She didn't flinch. "We will pay $5,000 for discretion between now and tomorrow night, and a bonus if you deliver to me the name of the person who did this, with evidence I can use. I have the checkbook in the car, and Mr. Kurian will make good the balance if the board hesitates." Wolfe slitted his eyes at me. $5,000 isn't what it used to be, but it buys beer. It also buys a reason to say no. He had reasons, always. He hates deadlines, hates kitchens not his own, hates donors, hates women in hats. He also has a sense, perverse as it is, of when the universe has made a provocation personal. He did not look at the goose when he said, "Very well." He said it the way a man says good evening to a storm. "I cannot go see your kitchen. You will bring to me what it would tell me if I had the misfortune to stand in it. The recipe cards, the spice jar the chef questions, a list of every person with a key, and the director, the chef, and the one you called the former student will each present themselves here in my office at 6 o'clock. If one refuses, tell him that I will presume his absence a confession." She blinked. That wasn't precisely friendly. "They will come," she said. "If I order them, they will come." "You prefer that word to ask?" Wolfe murmured. "Good. As for your rival foundation and your journalist, give Archie their names and addresses. He will use his legs." She looked at me. "People often do when he issues my legs as orders." "I do not know your fees for legs," she said. "They come attached to the 5,000, I told her. "It's a package." She nodded and rose. "You will have the items in an hour, and the people at 6. Mr. Wolfe," she added, "forgive me for intruding on your day." "Do not," he said. "It is already intruded upon." When she left, I closed the door and turned to Wolfe with my best affronted stare. "You are taking a case about dishwashing for $5,000, and you didn't even grunt. I know you like a case with a garnish, but this is suds." He let his eyes travel to the kitchen door and back. "Archie," he said, "someone came into my house and attempted to reimpose innocence. They polished a vessel that had earned its experience. Miss Blake's angel is the same angel. It is not dishwashing. It is effacement. I detest it." "Effacement," I repeated. "You're moved because someone polished a pot." His head came half an inch forward. "I am moved because a kitchen is an archive. To erase a record is an act. To erase it expertly is an intention. To erase it badly is a personality." "Ah," I said, enlightened. "So we're after a personality." "Spare me," he said. Fritz came in with coffee, because in our brownstone we use caffeine the way a banker uses columns. He said nothing about the goose, because he knows his man. He put down the tray, then, after 2 steps to the door, came back and couldn't help it. "Mr. Wolfe, will you catch the man who polished it?" Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "If it is a man," he said, "or a woman, or a fool, yes." Fritz departed, changed in complexion from the grey of insult to the rose of retribution. That freed me to do the work Wolfe never does. I got Miss Blake's list off the phone by 3. Director, Roland Quayle. Chef instructor, Matteo Voss. Former student, Lila Payne. Rival Foundation contact, Mrs. Adelaine Orr of the Housecraft League. Journalist, a man named Vern Carson of the Ledger. I filed those names in my head under characters you'll soon be seeing, and phoned Saul Panzer just to keep him warm. Wolfe twitched a finger and said not yet. At 3:30, a courier brought us a heavy envelope that smelled like cloves and trouble. It had the recipe cards in it and a spice jar taped tighter than an accountant's wallet. The handwriting on the cards was neat. The spice was not. Fritz hovered while I set them on Wolfe's desk. "Do not uncork," Wolfe said sharply. "You will do it when I tell you." He flicked a finger at the envelope. A man flicks at a cord. "Archie, take the jar and the cards and put them in the safe. Look at nothing. Touch nothing. Then go up and dress to be outside. We will not have time for dinner if fuss is to be made, and I won't have my digestion martyred to Miss Blake's cataclysm." "I thought you were not leaving your chair," I said. "I am not," he said. "You, however, are detachable. At 4, you will call on Mrs. Orr and the journalist. Say that I require their presence at 6:30 with Miss Blake's lot, or they will find their names in a short sentence of mine that begins with Kramer. Bring me their positions. Don't argue with them. Do not be inveigled into eating anything they offer. Avoid in particular cookies. You're making a rule against cookies now. I'm making a rule against everything that covers its taste. You're in a mood." He gave me half an inch of a nod. "Yes." I went to the safe with the jar and the cards like they were nitroglycerin, and I felt like a member of the bomb squad, which is interesting because I have never seen a bomb that smelled like fenugreek. While I was doing that, the house, which earlier had suffered a minor brightening, settled back to its proper complexion. The hall looked like itself. The office breathed for the three of us again, and the pot in the next room hung and gleamed with the insolence of a crime not yet named. We had ourselves a case, and Wolfe hadn't left his chair. We also had 4 hours to corral a chef, a director, a former student with a grudge, a rival with a smile, and a hack with a pencil, and get them under our roof without blowing the lid off the stew. If this sounds like a lot of trouble for a kitchen that's too clean, you're welcome to come tell it to Fritz. I'd suggest you leave your polishing rag at home. I took the coupe because city weather was breathing for a change, and if I had to peddle Wolfe's invitations, I wanted something under me that didn't squeak. Mrs. Adelaine Orr's building off Park had a doorman whose uniform starch could have cut bread, and the elevator carried me up as if it preferred not to notice my existence. Mrs. Orr herself met me in a sheath so crisp it might have been starched too, her handshake cool as a sealed envelope. "Mr. Goodwin, from Mr. Wolfe," she said, as if I'd arrived to check her silverware. She led me into a living room that was a recruiting poster for the Housecraft League. Girls in uniforms stirring pots, quotes on the wall about dignity and domestic arts, and on the sideboard a cellophane-wrapped pyramid of cookies, each with its ribbon. The magazine on the coffee table sat at a perfect 45. "You've heard from Miss Blake?" I asked, settling in. "I have." Her smile was meant to imply graciousness and just enough guilt to be useful. "Regina and I collaborate when we must. We compete when we must. She has nerves. Thinks this incident was directed at her program. Perhaps it was." She shifted seats without creasing her dress. "She wants me present to vouch for standards or absorb the blame. I want you present because Mr. Wolfe said so. 6:30. Your hat will be admired." Her eyes measured me. "Mr. Wolfe is in the business of solving crime. This is administrative. Housecraft is full of unsung labor. One forgets kitchens do not police themselves. We have protocols. Blake is romantic. They race ahead with flourish. We, on the other hand, count and audit and sanitize." I finished. "It is not a vulgar word," she said sharply. "Cleanliness is safety. It is discipline. It is power," I suggested. "Responsibility," she corrected. "If one of Regina's people made a display of policy dressed as mischief, that's a quarrel, not a crime. I failed to see why a detective must be involved." "You'll see at 6:30. Or Inspector Kramer can explain to your donors tomorrow why you had to host him at your tasting. I eyed the cookie pyramid. Generous of you. They're for events, she said, neutral, signaling she'd marked Wolfe's rule about cookies. We have a reputation for never poisoning anyone. High bar, I said. 6:30. Please don't be late. Mr. Wolfe gets stout when the world is not prompt. Her smile flickered. Of course, it will be instructive. Next was Vern Carson at the ledger, a floor with the aroma of ink and last-minute panic. Carson perched behind a desk buried since the Coolidge administration, hat at a defensive angle, hands stained with typewriter ribbon. Wolfe, huh? He said. He wants me present. He got religion. You should be so lucky. Miss Blake's kitchen got the scrub of the century. She thinks sabotage. Wolfe thinks attention. Your editor would like a column if you're there to see a philanthropist yell at a chef. You selling tickets? He chewed his pencil, realized it was wood. Blake called me. The director gave me budget lines. The chef told me to go put my head in a stock pot. Why would Wolfe care? Because someone cleaned a place they had no right to. He's sentimental about stains. Carson barked a laugh. Wolfe likes his history with a little grime. Who's the villain? Some donor trying to make a rival look sloppy. That's not a crime you can charge, but it's a sin you can quote. 6:30. You bring your hat, not because it looks better, but because it's part of your head. He grinned. If Wolfe thinks he's using me, he's right. If I'm using him, he's right. Back at the brownstone, Fritz was stocking up on patience and holy water. It will be a parade, he said, and the stairs will not be safe from feet. Look at the rug when it's over, I told him. Meanwhile, we're earning beer. Wolfe listened to my reports with eyelids low, mouth set. Mrs. Orr is an advocate for antisepsis, he observed. She will say the crime is that the wrong person did the right work. She built a cookie pyramid. He shuddered. Gumata. Archie. In the safe? The cards only. Bring them. Put them on my desk. Set 8 chairs. No one touches anything else. If one reaches for the globe, slap the hand. You want music? Discipline. I arranged the chairs, tested the sight lines, and laid out the cards. Still sealed. Fritz glided in with a tray for Wolfe's beer, then retreated as if we had mice. Wolfe's chair took the stage. His eyes tracked every movement, cataloging nervousness and vanity before a word was spoken. At 6 sharp, the bell sounded. Regina Blake entered, composed but tense, with 3 in tow. Roland Quayle, director, polished to a shine. Matteo Voss, chef, broad-shouldered, eyes finding the copper goose in the kitchen and nodding to it like a lost comrade. And Lila Payne, the former student, clutching a portfolio and dignity. Quayle tried to look above it. Voss radiated insult. Lila radiated grievance. You told me to come, Lila said, not asking for approval. Here you are, I said, taking her portfolio. Wolfe's rule. No uncontrolled paper in the room. Wolfe let them settle, then gave a small flick of a finger. Miss Blake is my client for the next 24 hours. That is a statement, not a debate. Mr. Quayle, as director, you control key distribution. Quayle's chin found an angle. Yes, you will recite who has them. He did, Wolfe correcting once, not looking up. Night porter has a pass key. Yes. Mr. Voss, what was removed from your spice jar? Voss's mouth pulled. It was not removed. It was added. It's not my garam masala. It smells of the hand that made it. You claim a nose that discriminates owners, Wolfe said. Immodest but possible. We will put your nose to the jar when we permit smell, not before. Lila stayed silent until Wolfe's eyes found her. Miss Payne. Threats. She met him. I told Blake I'd make a scene if they used my recipes without credit and raised money off them. They said they wouldn't steal. I believed them as far as I could throw them. I learned to cook because I was hungry. I don't want to go back to that. Quayle coughed dryly. "We don't steal student work." "You take it onto the website," she shot back. "You call it community showcase. No pay. But you get donors, and the pictures are pretty. Mr. Wolfe, I'm here because Blake ordered me. I'm not here to smear the program, but I'm done decorating someone else's plated conscience." The room cooled. Wolfe folded his hands, pleased at the tension. "For now, you all came because someone polished what should be left human. A kitchen that has cooked is not a showroom. Someone attempted to return it to infancy. It is an impulse I distrust." Quayle tried for control. "It seems planned." "Then a plan that gratifies an impulse. Mrs. Orr will be here shortly, and a newspaperman who cannot be bribed or distracted but can be lied to. Until then, you will not discuss this matter among yourselves, nor rise, nor touch anything." He looked at me. "Archie. Door." I caught the next arrivals. Mrs. Orr, crisp as frost with a bag that could have held bandages or mercy, and Vern Carson, hat at an angle, eyes amused. Fritz hovered, the kitchen door a border. Checkpoint. Wolfe waited until the room was full. "You have intruded on my house," he said, voice low and implacable. "You have brought with you a smell of soap and contention. I permit it because my cook has been affronted and Miss Blake appeals to civility. You will leave with the truth. It is unpleasant. Drink if you want courage." Fritz. Fritz stepped in, beer for Wolfe and the others, except Mrs. Orr, who declined. Voss drank as if it were antidote. Lila held hers like a token. Quayle sipped and put it down off the coaster. Wolfe watched the coaster. It was one of his tells. He wanted you to believe he was thinking about the wrong thing. "The recipe cards," he said. "Archie, open the envelope and lay out the sequence for the tasting. Do not mix them. Mr. Quayle, you will not approach the desk. Mr. Voss, you may look from your chair. Miss Payne, you may tell me if you recognize your work. Mrs. Orr, you may remark on font if you must." I slid the cards from their envelope like relics. They were neat, typed, with blue pencil notes. I laid them in order: savory tartlets, chickpea stew, roast cauliflower with spice blend, lemon possets, coffee. "Ah," Wolfe murmured. "So, the cauliflower is where we will find our quarrel. Because the spice is where you leave a signature. Those who efface do not like signatures." He shut his eyes. Not a nap, but a lowering of the curtain. The brownstone was full of strangers and keys and words, and Wolfe was in his chair, beer in hand, the center of the room. The copper goose glinted from the kitchen, bearing its insult. Outside, the city hummed like a larder at day's end. Inside, the sanctity of our house had been disturbed, not by blood, but by something scrubbed too clean. Wolfe had his suspects, his evidence, and his audience. The play had begun. Wolfe opened his eyes and let them travel slowly around the room, pausing on each face like a jeweler examining stones for flaws. The silence stretched until it had weight, and I could see everyone except Carson fighting the urge to fidget. Carson, being a newspaperman, was used to uncomfortable silences and was busy taking notes that probably said things like, "Fat man stares, suspect sweat." "Miss Payne," Wolfe said finally, "approach the desk, examine the cauliflower recipe card. Tell me what you recognize and what you do not." Lila rose with the careful movements of someone walking through a minefield. She leaned over the card, her face tightening as she read. "The base recipe is mine. The proportions, the technique, that's from my final project. But these notes in blue pencil." She straightened, her voice carrying the particular indignation of an artist whose work has been vandalized. "Someone change the spice ratios, reduce the cardamom by half, increase the turmeric. It would taste like dirt." And the handwriting of these alterations? Not mine, and not the way I would write cooking notes. This says subcumin if garum. Flat. I would never write sub. I would write substitute or replace. This is someone trying to sound like they know kitchen shorthand. Wolfe's fingers drummed once against his chair arm. Mr. Voss, from your position, can you see the annotations Miss Payne describes? Voss leaned forward, squinting. Yes, and she is right. Those are not my notes either. I wrote the timing adjustments, the garnish notes, but toast spices low to avoid smoke. I do not write to avoid smoke. I write to create flavor. Why would someone fear smoke in that kitchen? Wolfe asked. Quayle answered too quickly. The building's smoke alarm is sensitive. We had an incident 2 months ago. The fire department came. The neighbors complained to the landlord. Ah. Wolfe's tone suggested he'd found something tasty. So someone familiar with the building's quirks wrote that note? Someone who knew that smoke would bring unwanted attention? He shifted his gaze. Archie, bring the spice jar. Handle it with the gloves Fritz provided. I retrieved the jar from the safe, handling it like it contained plutonium. The glass was clean, the metal lid properly sealed, but when I unscrewed it, a complex aroma wafted out, warm spices undercut by something sharper, something that didn't belong. Mr. Voss, Wolfe said, demonstrate your claim about this blend. Voss approached the desk with the reverence of a man approaching an altar, took the jar, and inhaled deeply. His face went through several expressions, none of them pleasant. This is not my garam masala. Someone has added cheap curry powder, the kind you buy pre-mixed at the corner store. It kills the subtlety, makes everything taste the same. He paused, inhaled again, his frown deepening. And there is something else. Something that should not be in spices at all. What? Soap, he said flatly. Industrial soap. Whoever mixed this had soap residue on their hands. The kind of soap you use to scrub floors, not to wash dishes. The room went quiet except for the scratch of Carson's pencil. Mrs. Orr shifted in her chair, and I caught the movement because I'm paid to catch movements. Mrs. Orr, Wolfe said pleasantly, you seem uncomfortable with Mr. Voss's diagnosis. I'm uncomfortable with the implication that someone would deliberately contaminate food, she said stiffly. It's unprofessional, destructive, but not unprecedented in your experience. Her composure developed hairline cracks. We've had incidents, disgruntled former employees, people who disagree with our methods. Your methods being practical, accessible. We believe in teaching skills that work in real kitchens with real budgets, not showcase kitchens with exotic ingredients. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. So you would consider Mr. Voss's approach, with its emphasis on authentic spice blends and traditional techniques, to be perhaps too refined for the population you serve? I would consider it aspirational, she said carefully. Not. Everyone has access to hand-ground spices or the time to bloom each element separately. Indeed. And if someone wished to demonstrate that point, they might substitute a more accessible spice blend for an artisanal one, to prove that the donors wouldn't notice the difference. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Regina Blake found her voice. Mr. Wolfe, are you suggesting someone deliberately sabotaged our tasting to make a philosophical point? I am suggesting, Wolfe said, that someone with strong opinions about culinary authenticity versus accessibility had both motive and means to alter your recipes. Someone who knew your building's alarm system, had access to industrial cleaning supplies, and possessed keys to your facility. Quayle cleared his throat. If you're implying that I'm implying nothing yet, Mr. Quayle. I'm establishing facts. Fact 1. Your spice blend was contaminated with cheap curry powder and soap residue. Fact 2. Your kitchen was cleaned with industrial-grade supplies. Fact 3. Your recipe cards were annotated by someone familiar with your building's limitations. Fact 4. He looked directly at me. Archie, what did your preliminary inquiries reveal about key accountability? I consulted my notes. According to Mr. Quayle's records, all keys were accounted for Friday evening. However, staff member Everett Pike failed to sign his key back in Thursday night after an extra shift. He returned it this morning with apologies. Mr. Pike, Wolfe mused. Describe him, Mr. Quayle. Reliable, conscientious, perhaps overly concerned with following procedures to the letter. The type of person who might clean obsessively to cover his tracks. The type of person who might clean obsessively because that's what he thinks he should do. Boss interjected. Everett follows rules. If someone told him the kitchen needed to be spotless for inspection, he would make it spotless. Interesting. Wolfe's eyes found Carson. Mr. Carson, you mentioned receiving an anonymous email about sanitation disputes. When exactly did this arrive? Carson flipped through his notebook. 3 days ago, Sunday evening, from a Blake Fund email address, but obviously not from anyone willing to put their name on it. And what did this email suggest? That there was conflict between the chef and director over cleanliness standards, that corners were being cut to save money, that someone was going to get the program in trouble with health inspectors. Regina Blake's face had gone pale. We don't cut corners. Our last inspection was excellent. But someone wanted a reporter to believe otherwise, Wolfe observed. Someone who knew that negative publicity before a major donor event could be devastating. Someone who understood that the mere suggestion of sanitation problems would require immediate, visible action. He let that settle, then continued. The pattern emerges. Anonymous accusations of poor standards, followed by obsessive cleaning that would be obvious to anyone entering the kitchen. Subtle sabotage of recipes that would make the food mediocre without being obviously tampered with. The work of someone who wanted to create a crisis they could then solve. Or someone who wanted to demonstrate that high standards were unnecessary because donors wouldn't notice the difference anyway. Lila Payne had been quiet, but now she spoke up. You're talking about someone who thinks they know better than everyone else. Someone who believes their way is the right way, even if they have to prove it by making everyone else look incompetent. Precisely, Miss Payne. Someone with access, knowledge, and a conviction that their approach to food service is superior. Wolfe's gaze swept the room. Someone who may have acted from the best of intentions, believing they were correcting a flaw rather than committing a crime. The office fell silent except for the distant sounds of Fritz preparing dinner and the city humming beyond our windows. Wolfe had laid out the framework of the crime without naming the criminal, which is his way of letting guilt ferment before he uncorks it. Everyone in the room was now looking at everyone else with new suspicion, wondering who among them had appointed themselves judge of proper kitchen standards. We will continue this discussion at 9 o'clock, Wolfe announced, when Mr. Pike and the night porter join us. Until then, you are dismissed. Do not discuss this matter among yourselves. Do not contact Mr. Pike, and do not, his eyes found Mrs. Orr, attempt to sanitize anything else. As they filed out, I caught the look that passed between Quayle and Mrs. Orr. It wasn't guilt, exactly, but it wasn't innocence either. It was the look of people who had just realized they were standing in quicksand and weren't sure which direction was solid ground. When the door closed behind them, Wolfe let out a small sigh. Archie, call Saul. Have him visit this Everett Pike before 9 o'clock. I want to know if Mr. Pike owns industrial soap, blue pencils, and strong opinions about proper kitchen management. You think Pike is our spotless angel. I think Mr. Pike may be someone's useful fool, Wolfe said. The question is whose? Saul Panzer answered on the second ring, which meant he was either sitting by the phone or had developed telepathy. Since Saul's practical that way, I went with the phone. Pike, I said without preamble. Everett Pike. Works part-time for the Blake Fund. Has keys, and apparently thinks soap is a food group. I need everything. Where he lives, what he eats for breakfast, and whether he's the type to polish copper at midnight for the good of humanity. Address? I gave him what I had. And Saul, if he's not home, find out why. If he is home, find out if he's been washing his hands compulsively since Sunday night. Time frame? Yesterday. We've got a kitchen that's too clean and a case that's getting dirtier by the hour. While Saul went to work, I decided to take a closer look at our cast of characters. The Blake Fund operates out of a modest office in Midtown, the kind of place where good intentions meet quarterly reports. I took the coupe and made some calls from the street, because sometimes you learn more about people when they think you're not paying attention. Background investigation. My first call was to a contact in the non-profit world, a woman who knows where the bodies are buried in charitable organizations. She painted an interesting picture of Roland Quayle. Competent but not visionary, the kind of director who keeps the lights on but doesn't inspire donors to write big checks. More importantly, his contract was up for renewal in 6 months, and the board had been making noises about wanting fresh leadership. He's been courting the Carnegie Foundation for a major grant, she told me. Something about expanding their reach to underserved communities. But Carnegie's been burned before by programs that looked good on paper but fell apart under scrutiny. They're doing deep background checks now, looking at everything from financial management to actual program effectiveness. That gave Quayle a powerful motive to ensure nothing went wrong with the upcoming tasting. A scandal now would kill his chances at both the grant and contract renewal. Next, I called Felix Kurian at Rusterman's. Felix knows every chef in the city and most of their secrets. Matteo Voss. Felix's voice carried the weight of professional assessment. Brilliant cook, terrible politician. He worked at Le Bernardin years ago, then opened his own place downtown. Beautiful food, but he couldn't compromise on ingredients or techniques. The restaurant folded during the recession, not because the food wasn't good, but because Voss refused to adapt the menu to what people could afford. Bitter about it. Philosophical. He believes food is sacred, that cutting corners is a betrayal of the craft. Working at the Blake Fund is probably killing him slowly, but he needs the steady paycheck. He's got a daughter in college. That painted Voss as someone who would be deeply offended by cheap curry powder masquerading as authentic spices, but also someone who couldn't afford to lose his job over principles. Saul's report. Saul called back at 6:30, just as Fritz was serving Wolfe his pre-dinner beer with the solemnity of a communion service. "Pike's interesting," Saul said. "Lives alone in Queens. Apartment so clean you could perform surgery on the kitchen floor. Neighbors say he's obsessive about cleanliness. Polishes his doorknob twice a week. Scrubs the hallway outside his apartment every Sunday. Charming. What's his story? Used to work for the Housecraft League, Mrs. Orr's outfit. Got fired about 18 months ago for being too thorough. According to the termination paperwork I managed to see, he was using industrial-strength cleaners on antique wooden displays and some of their older equipment. Mrs. Orr herself signed off on his dismissal, called him zealous to a fault. I felt something click into place. So he knows Mrs. Orr personally, and she knows exactly how he operates. Gets better. Pike felt the Housecraft League was cutting corners on hygiene standards. He told a former colleague that Mrs. Orr was more interested in cost-effective solutions than proper sanitation. He thought they weren't serious about maintaining professional standards. And now he's working for their competition. Part-time, but he takes it seriously. Keeps detailed logs of his cleaning procedures, uses a specific brand of industrial soap that he swears by. The same soap, incidentally, that would leave exactly the kind of residue your chef detected in the spice jar. The night porter's account. At 7, I brought in Murphy, the night porter from the Blake Fund building. He was a thin man with careful eyes and the kind of hands that had seen honest work. He settled into the red leather chair like he was expecting it to judge him. Sunday night was quiet until about 11:30, he told Wolfe. Then I heard the elevator running. Building was supposed to be locked down, so I went to check. And found Mr. Pike on the kitchen floor with a cart full of cleaning supplies. Professional-grade stuff, not the usual household cleaners. He said Mr. Quayle had asked him to do a deep clean before the Monday event. Showed me a work order on Blake Fund letterhead. Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. You examined this document? Typed sheet, very detailed. Listed specific tasks. Scrub the ranges. Polish all copper. Bleach the cutting boards. Sanitize every surface. More thorough than anything I'd seen before. But Pike's that way. He takes pride in going above and beyond. Was he alone? Murphy hesitated. No, sir. There was a woman with him. Well-dressed lady. Maybe 55. Gray hair in a neat style. She was in the office area. Said she was from the Housecraft League doing a consultation. Had her own key. Knew her way around the building. Mrs. Orr, I said. That's the name she gave. When I asked Pike about her, he said Mr. Quayle had arranged for her to review their procedures as part of the preparation for the tasting. The pattern emerges. Back in the office, I laid out what we had for Wolfe. He listened with his eyes closed, fingers drummed against his chair arm in the rhythm he uses when pieces are falling into place. So, I said, Pike is a genuine fanatic for cleanliness who got fired from Mrs. Orr's organization for being too zealous. Mrs. Orr knows exactly how his mind works and what kind of instructions will send him into overdrive. Quayle is desperate to avoid any problems that might cost him his job and his grant. And someone, probably Mrs. Orr, convinced Pike that the Blake Fund kitchen needed to be made perfect for an important inspection. The beauty of it, Wolfe murmured, is that Pike would believe he was doing essential work. His obsession with cleanliness would make him the perfect instrument. He would polish that copper until it screamed, scrub every surface until it was sterile, and feel proud of his thoroughness. And Mrs. Orr gets to demonstrate that her practical approach to food service is superior to the Blake Fund's elitist methods. The donors see a kitchen so antiseptic it looks fake, taste food that's been deliberately made mediocre, and conclude that the Housecraft League's more down-to-earth approach is what really works. While Mr. Quayle, if he was complicit, gets to appear as the responsible administrator who took preemptive action to ensure standards were met. Or, if he was merely manipulated, he becomes another victim of Mrs. Orr's scheme. Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face carrying the particular expression he reserves for announcing dinner when the world has been unreasonable. "The veal is ready," he said, "and the kitchen is still too bright." Wolfe rose with the dignity of a man who has solved the essential mystery and can now attend to the essential meal. "We will gather them at 9 o'clock, he said. "All of them. It is time to strip the varnish from this particular piece of furniture and see what lies beneath." As we moved toward the dining room, I caught sight of the copper goose hanging in the kitchen, still gleaming with its unnatural brightness. In a few hours, we'd have our answers. But first, we'd have Fritz's veal, because even in the middle of a case about kitchens that are too clean, a man has to eat. And in Nero Wolfe's house, we eat well. At 9 o'clock sharp, I had them arranged in our office like pieces on a chessboard, each one wondering if they were a pawn or about to be taken by one. The new face belonged to Everett Pike, and if you've never seen a man whose soul runs on bleach and good intentions, he was your educational opportunity. He was compact and precise, with hands that looked like they'd been scrubbed with a wire brush and eyes that catalogued dust motes the way an accountant tallies pennies. Pike wore a clean shirt that wanted to be cleaner, hair combed into submission, and carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who believed proper alignment was a moral virtue. When I shook his hand, I caught a whiff of industrial soap strong enough to sterilize a morgue. Not Fritz's soap. Fritz doesn't buy anything that advertises its ability to dissolve paint. Wolfe entered at 9:05, which is his way of reminding everyone that punctuality is a courtesy. He extends rather than a requirement he follows. He settled behind his desk with the satisfaction of a man who has dined well and is now prepared to serve justice as the evening's entertainment. The interrogation begins. Mr. Pike, Wolfe said without preamble. On Sunday night, you entered the Blake Fund kitchen with cleaning supplies and proceeded to scour it into submission. You were observed by Mr. Murphy here and accompanied by Mrs. Orr. You will now explain who instructed you to perform this zealous ablution. Pike straightened, if such a thing were possible. I received a call Saturday afternoon from someone identifying herself as Mr. Quayle's administrative assistant. She said there would be an emergency cleaning Sunday night, that important donors were coming Monday, and everything had to be perfect. She mentioned that Mrs. Orr from the Housecraft League would be consulting on proper standards. This woman knew your schedule, your access, your previous employment with Mrs. Orr's organization. Yes, sir. She was very well informed. She said Mrs. Orr had specifically requested me because of my attention to detail and my understanding of proper sanitation protocols. Quayle started to protest, but Wolfe's raised finger stopped him like a traffic signal. Continue, Mr. Pike. I met Mrs. Orr at 11:30. She had a detailed checklist, very professional. She explained that the Blake Fund's daily cleaning standards were adequate for routine use, but insufficient for donor presentations. She wanted everything brought up to what she called exhibition quality. The violation discovered. While Pike spoke, I noticed Fritz hovering in the doorway with the particular expression he reserves for announcing disasters. He caught my eye and jerked his chin toward the hall. I followed him to where our umbrella stand lies like a small brass sentinel. The drip tray beneath it gleamed with a fresh, unnatural shine, a crescent of brightness in a month's worth of honest tarnish. Fritz doesn't polish that tray. He lets it accumulate the dignity that comes with use. Now someone had wiped it clean, testing their compulsion on our property. I returned to the office and reported. Wolfe's eyes went flat as winter ice. Mr. Pike, Wolfe said, his voice carrying the chill of absolute judgment. While seated in my office, you took it upon yourself to polish my umbrella stand's drip tray. Pike didn't even try to deny it. It was tarnished. It reflects poorly on the household to leave brass unattended. You will not, Wolfe said with dangerous quiet, presume to improve my house. This is a repository of experience, not a showroom for your obsessions. The tarnish on that tray is 3 years of honest service. You had no right to erase it. The room went silent except for Carson's pencil, scratching notes that probably said something like, "Fat man defends tarnish, suspect wilts." The spice contamination. Now, Wolfe continued, the spices. Mr. Voss, examine the jar we retrieved from your kitchen. I handed the jar to Voss, who unscrewed the lid and inhaled. His face went through several expressions, none of them pleasant. This is not my garam masala. Someone has contaminated it with cheap curry powder, the kind you buy pre-mixed at corner stores. It kills the subtlety. He paused, inhaled again. And there's soap residue. Industrial soap. Mr. Pike, Wolfe said, your hands bear the scent of sodium carbonate and surfactants. The same industrial soap that contaminated Mr. Voss's spice blend. You will explain. Pike looked confused but answered honestly. Mrs. Orr said the spice blends needed to be checked for freshness and consistency. She had me empty the jars, wash them thoroughly to remove any contamination, then refill them with blends she brought. She said they were more reliable mixtures that would photograph better and taste more familiar to donors who might not appreciate exotic flavors. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Voss looked like he was contemplating homicide. Mrs. Orr's philosophy. Exposed Mrs. Orr, Wolfe said, his tone deceptively mild. You substituted commercial curry powder for authentic garam masala because you believed donors wouldn't notice the difference? Mrs. Orr's composure developed hairline cracks. I provided practical consultation. The Blake Fund's approach to culinary education is impractical and elitist. They teach techniques and use ingredients their students will never be able to afford or replicate. It's culinary tourism, not practical education. So you decided to prove your point by ensuring their food would be mediocre? I decided to demonstrate that most donors care more about feeling sophisticated than about actual food quality. If they truly cared about practical education rather than prestige, they would fund programs that teach accessible skills with affordable ingredients. The pattern emerges. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. A fascinating philosophy. You believe in the democratization of cuisine through the deliberate reduction of standards. And you felt this message would be more effectively delivered through secret sabotage than through honest competition? Sometimes people need to see that the emperor has no clothes. Indeed. And Mr. Pike, with his obsessive devotion to cleanliness, was the perfect instrument for your demonstration. A man who would polish copper until it screamed, scrub surfaces until they were sterile, and feel proud of his thoroughness. Never suspecting he was being used to make a kitchen look more like a laboratory than a place where food is lovingly prepared. Pike stared at Mrs. Orr with dawning comprehension and betrayal. The anonymous email to Mr. Carson, Wolfe continued, warning of sanitation problems at the Blake Fund. That was your opening gambit, wasn't it, Mrs. Orr? Create suspicion, then provide the solution through Mr. Pike's excessive ministrations. Carson looked up from his notes. The email came from a Blake Fund address, but was routed through a public terminal. Someone wanted to create a story about sanitation disputes without taking credit for it. The trap tightens. Mr. Quayle, Wolfe said, shifting his attention, you had motive for visible corrective action to impress donors and auditors. But did you authorize Mrs. Orr's consultation, or were you merely another instrument in her campaign? Quayle's face had gone pale. I may have mentioned concerns about meeting donor expectations. I may have asked Mrs. Orr for advice about standards, but I never authorized her to enter our kitchen or alter our preparations. Of course not, because you are not a saboteur, Mr. Quayle. You are merely a man under pressure who provided Mrs. Orr with the opening she needed to execute her plan. Wolfe rose slightly in his chair, which for him is the equivalent of standing on a soapbox. Mrs. Orr, you have committed fraud, sabotage, and the corruption of honest labor. You used false pretenses to gain access to a competitor's facility, deliberately contaminated food intended for public consumption, and manipulated a well-meaning employee into participating in your scheme. All to prove that your philosophy of culinary mediocrity is superior to the Blake Fund's commitment to authentic techniques. The room held its breath. Mrs. Orr sat rigid, her carefully constructed world of practical solutions crumbling around her. Pike looked like a man who had just discovered his religion was a lie. We will adjourn, Wolfe announced, for 10 minutes, during which no one will rise, no one will speak, and no one will touch anything in this house. When we return, Mrs. Orr will explain exactly how she orchestrated this campaign of cleanliness as warfare, and we will determine what justice looks like for a woman who weaponized soap. He picked up his beer and drank, leaving the room to breathe like something that had been scrubbed too clean and was finally remembering how to be alive. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Inside our brownstone, order was being restored, not through industrial soap and obsessive polishing, but through the patient application of truth to the stains that really matter. The 10 minutes passed like a held breath in a room full of people trying not to exhale guilt. Pike sat rigid as a man expecting judgment, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Mrs. Orr maintained her composure with the determination of someone who had decided that dignity was the only asset she had left to spend. Quayle studied his shoes as if they contained the secrets of administrative salvation. The rest watched Wolfe with the fascination of people witnessing either a masterpiece or a demolition, possibly both. When Wolfe returned at 9:15, he carried with him the particular air of a man who has spent 10 minutes arranging facts in their proper order and is now prepared to serve them as the evening's main course. He settled behind his desk with the satisfaction of a conductor approaching a familiar symphony, one he intended to play without missing a note. "Mr. Pike," Wolfe said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You mentioned receiving detailed instructions for Sunday night's work. You keep records, do you not? Pike nodded quickly, reaching for a slim black notebook with the eagerness of a man offering evidence of his own diligence. Yes, sir. I document all procedures, times, materials used. He handed it over with the reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. I took the notebook and flipped through pages of meticulous entries. Pike's handwriting was as precise as his cleaning, each letter formed with the care of a monk illuminating manuscripts. Work order dated Sunday, I reported to Wolfe. Blake Fund letterhead. Lists specific tasks. Exhibition quality sanitation for donor optics. Use industrial-grade alkaline degreaser. Bleach all cutting boards. Polish copper to mirror finish. The evidence accumulates. Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction. Exhibition quality for donor optics. An interesting phrase, Mr. Pike. Is this language you typically encounter in cleaning instructions? No, sir. Usually they just say deep clean or event preparation. This was more professional. Indeed. Miss Blake, do your staff use such terminology? Regina shook her head firmly. We say event ready or presentation standard. Optics isn't our vocabulary. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Mrs. Orr with the precision of a spotlight finding its target. But it is yours, Mrs. Orr. The language of institutional management, where appearance matters more than substance. Mrs. Orr's mouth compressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. Archie, Wolfe continued, the contaminated spice jar. Bring it here, along with a bowl of warm water and a spoon. I retrieved the items, handling the jar as if it contained evidence of original sin. When I unscrewed the lid, the aroma that escaped was complex in all the wrong ways. Warm spices undercut by something sharp and artificial. Mr. Voss, Wolfe said, demonstrate for us the contamination you detected. Voss approached the desk with the reverence of a priest approaching an altar, took the jar, and inhaled deeply. His expression progressed through several stages of professional horror. This is not my garam masala. Someone has added cheap curry powder, the kind that comes pre-mixed from corner stores. It destroys the subtlety, makes everything taste the same. He paused. He inhaled again, his frown deepening. And there's something else. Industrial soap residue, the kind used for heavy cleaning, not food preparation. At Wolfe's nod, I spooned a small amount of the spice blend into the warm water and stirred. The surface didn't behave like authentic spices should. It left a faint film, an oily slick that caught the light with the wrong kind of gleam. Fritz, who had been hovering protectively near the kitchen door, stepped forward and sniffed the mixture. His face went through the expressions of a man witnessing desecration. Soap, he said simply, as if the word explained all the world's sorrows. Mrs. Orr's campaign revealed. Mrs. Orr, Wolfe said, his tone deceptively conversational, you will now provide us with the complete chronology of your educational demonstration. Begin with your philosophical objections to the Blake Fund's approach. Mrs. Orr's composure developed hairline cracks, but she maintained her dignity with the determination of someone who had decided to go down with all flags flying. The Blake Fund has been misleading donors for 3 years. They promise practical culinary education, but deliver culinary fantasy. Their students learn to prepare dishes they'll never be able to afford with techniques they'll never have time to practice in real kitchens. Your grievance is philosophical. My grievance is practical. We serve the same population, working-class women who need marketable skills. But the Blake Fund seduces donors with talk of authentic cuisine and artisanal techniques, while we do the actual work of teaching useful skills with accessible ingredients. Wolfe leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. So you decided to demonstrate that their approach was pretentious nonsense by sabotaging their donor presentation. I decided to let reality speak for itself. 6 weeks ago, I learned that Regina Blake was courting the Carnegie Foundation for the same expansion grant we had applied for. If Carnegie funded their program, it would effectively end ours. Her voice carried the particular bitterness of someone who believed they had been cheated by inferior competition. The systematic manipulation, the sequence of events, Wolfe continued methodically, began with your cultivation of Mr. Quayle's anxieties about the upcoming tasting. You knew his contract was up for renewal, that he was under pressure to secure the Carnegie grant. You offered consultation that appeared to address his concerns, while actually providing you with the intelligence needed for your campaign. Quayle shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I may have mentioned concerns about meeting donor expectations during our conversation at the Metropolitan Food Service Council meeting, but I never authorized. Of course not. You merely provided Mrs. Orr with the opening she needed. She learned about your building's sensitive smoke alarm, your staff schedules, your key distribution, information that would prove essential for her plan. Mrs. Orr's chin came up defiantly. I provided realistic consultation. I suggested that donors care more about the appearance of professionalism than about actual food quality. I proposed a small experiment. What if their kitchen looked absolutely perfect, but the food was merely adequate? Would anyone notice the difference? An experiment requiring a willing subject. Mr. Pike was the obvious choice, wasn't he? You knew his capabilities from his time with your organization, knew he would approach any cleaning task with religious devotion. More importantly, you knew he felt underappreciated at the Blake Fund. Part-time work, minimal recognition, no opportunity to demonstrate his full capabilities. Pike flinched as if she'd struck him physically. Pike's devastating realization. The phone call Saturday was elegantly simple, Mrs. Orr continued, her tone suggesting she was describing a chess move rather than a deception. I identified myself as Mr. Quayle's temporary administrative assistant, a position that explained why he hadn't met me before. I told him there was an emergency situation, that important donors were coming and everything had to be exhibition perfect. I specifically requested him because of his reputation for thoroughness. Pike looked up from his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. You used me. I utilized your skills in service of a greater truth. You lied to me. Pike's voice grew stronger, fueled by dawning comprehension and betrayal. You made me believe I was doing important work, that I was finally being appreciated for my standards. But I was just your tool. You were an instrument of education. I was an instrument of your ambition. Pike stood slowly, his composure cracking like ice under pressure. You turned my pride in my work into your weapon. You made me violate another person's kitchen, contaminate their food, erase their history. That copper pot in Mr. Wolfe's kitchen, it has years of honest cooking on it. I had no right to steal that from it. Mrs. Orr's carefully maintained facade finally showed serious cracks. You're being dramatic. It's just a pot. No, Pike said with quiet intensity. It's not just a pot. It's a record, and you made me erase it. Wolfe's final judgment. Wolfe nodded approvingly at Pike's revelation, then turned his full attention to Mrs. Orr with the expression he reserves for people who have disappointed him professionally and morally. Mrs. Orr, you have committed fraud through misrepresentation, trespassing through false pretenses, and sabotage through deliberate contamination of food intended for public consumption. You have corrupted an honest employee's labor and attempted to destroy a competitor's reputation through systematic deception. I demonstrated that the emperor has no clothes. You demonstrated that you believe mediocrity is virtue and that deception is acceptable when serving your vision of the greater good. You are a zealot, Mrs. Orr, and zealots are dangerous because they believe their cause justifies any method. The room fell silent except for the scratch of Carson's pencil and the distant sounds of the city beyond our windows. Honest noise from an honest world that didn't require polishing to justify its existence. You came into my house, Wolfe concluded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. And you brought with you the stench of deceit disguised as virtue. You attempted to impose your sterile vision on a world that thrives on natural imperfections and genuine flavor. You turned cleaning into warfare and contamination into education. You were wrong. He shifted his gaze to encompass the entire room. We will reconvene at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mrs. Orr will provide a written statement detailing her actions. Mr. Pike will be prepared to testify about how he was manipulated. Miss Blake will have her kitchen restored to honest working condition. And the rest of us will remember that some stains are meant to be preserved because they tell the story of work well done. The brownstone settled around us with the satisfaction of a house that had expelled an infection and was now prepared to heal. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Inside, order was being restored, not through industrial soap and obsessive polishing, but through the patient application of truth to the stains that really matter. As they filed out, I caught sight of our copper goose hanging in the kitchen, still gleaming with its unnatural brightness. Tomorrow, Fritz would begin the long process of letting it remember how to be a proper pot again. Some things, once polished too clean, take time to recover their honest patina. But they do recover. That's the thing about truth. It has a way of working its way back to the surface, no matter how much soap you use to scrub it away. The morning after a case breaks usually brings the particular quiet that settles over the brownstone when truth has been extracted and justice is being measured in proper portions. I came down at 8 to find Fritz in the kitchen, standing before the copper goose with a small vial of oil and the expression of a surgeon preparing for delicate work. "You're going to heal it?" I asked. "I'm going to help it remember how to be a pot," Fritz said solemnly. "Copper has memory, but someone tried to erase it with industrial soap. It will take months, but the metal will learn to trust again." He began applying oil with gentle strokes, working it into the surface with the patience of someone coaxing life back into damaged tissue. The harsh gleam began to soften, accepting the oil like a desert accepting the first drops of honest rain. The morning's intelligence. At 9:15, Saul called with the night's harvest. "She met Quayle at the diner on 2nd Avenue, he reported. 22 minutes of conversation. She did the talking, he did the sweating. I got Carnegie, Pike, letterhead, and contained quietly through the glass. He passed her an envelope, thin, then took it back when they were done." "Romantic," I said. "Any follow-up?" She went home. He walked 6 blocks in circles like a man measuring his grave, then took a cab to a building on Madison. "Not his address. I'll check the tenant list." When Wolfe came down at 9:30, I laid out Saul's intelligence along with the morning's mail, which included a heavy envelope from Mrs. Orr marked "Personal and Confidential." Inside was a typed statement, 20 pages of legal prose that managed to describe systematic sabotage as consultative guidance and fraud as alternative methodology demonstration. Wolfe read 3 pages and pushed it away with the expression he reserves for wine that has turned to vinegar. "This is not a confession, Archie. This is a legal brief disguised as contrition. Mrs. Orr believes she can pass her way out of culpability through the judicious use of passive voice." The final confrontation. At 10 o'clock, Mrs. Orr arrived with a thin, nervous man who introduced himself as Percival Finch, her legal counsel. Finch carried a briefcase that looked like it had been packed for a siege, and Mrs. Orr wore the expression of someone who had decided that dignity required complete inflexibility. "Mr. Wolfe," Finch began, "my client is here as a courtesy. She denies any criminal intent or actionable wrongdoing." "Indeed," Wolfe said without opening his eyes. She merely intended to demonstrate the superiority of her educational philosophy through systematic deception, deliberate contamination of food, and the manipulation of an honest employee. A mere academic exercise. Mrs. Orr's chin came up. I provided realistic consultation on practical standards. If the Blake Fund chose to interpret that as Mrs. Orr, Wolfe interrupted, his voice carrying the particular chill he reserves for people who insult his intelligence. "You will now listen. Yesterday evening, after you departed my office, you met with Mr. Quayle at a diner. You discussed damage control, specifically how to contain quietly the exposure of your scheme. Mr. Quayle provided you with something in an envelope, which you returned to him after examination. My operative observed this entire exchange." Finch started to object, but Wolfe continued without pause. "This morning I have received your statement, which is a masterpiece of legal evasion. You describe your actions as consultation and methodology demonstration. You omit entirely the false identity you assumed when calling Mr. Pike, the specific instructions you gave him regarding exhibition quality cleaning, and the deliberate substitution of inferior spices designed to make authentic cuisine taste mediocre." He opened his eyes and fixed them on Mrs. Orr with the intensity of a man sighting down a rifle. "You will now provide a truthful statement, detailing exactly how you orchestrated this campaign of sabotage. You will admit that your purpose was to discredit the Blake Fund's program and promote your own organization's approach. You will acknowledge that you exploited Mr. Pike's professional dedication for your own ends. And you will do this with clarity and honesty, or Inspector Kramer will receive a complete report of your activities, including testimony from Mr. Pike, building security records, and evidence of the contaminated spices." The terms of justice. Mrs. Orr's composure developed hairline cracks. "Mr. Wolfe, even if I were to provide such a statement, what assurance do I have that it won't be used to destroy my career? You have my word that it will be used only to ensure justice for those you have wronged. However, that justice will be comprehensive. You will provide a formal public apology to the Blake Fund, to Chef Voss, and to Mr. Pike. This apology will be published in the appropriate trade journals. You will also make substantial financial restitution to the Blake Fund, specifically for the replacement of contaminated ingredients and the professional restoration of their kitchen equipment." Finch looked like he was about to faint. "Mr. Wolfe, this is extortion." "This is consequences, Mr. Finch. Your client attempted to destroy a competitor through fraud and sabotage. She corrupted an honest employee's labor and contaminated food intended for public consumption. She may choose between private restitution and public prosecution. The choice is entirely hers." Mrs. Orr sat in silence for a full minute, her carefully constructed world of justified methodology crumbling around her. Finally, she nodded. "I will rewrite the statement, but I demand that Mr. Pike's involvement be characterized accurately, as the result of my manipulation, not his independent malice." "Mr. Pike's only crime was wanting to do his job well," Wolfe agreed. "Your crime was turning that virtue into your weapon." The resolution. By afternoon, the second statement had arrived. 20 pages of truth wrapped in legal language, but truth nonetheless. It detailed Mrs. Orr's resentment of the Blake Fund's success, her deliberate cultivation of Quayle's anxieties, her calculated exploitation of Pike's obsessive nature, and her systematic sabotage of the tasting preparations. Regina Blake called at 4, her voice carrying the particular joy of someone who had survived a disaster and emerged stronger. "The tasting was a triumph, Mr. Wolfe. Chef Voss managed to create something wonderful despite the sabotage, and our donors were more impressed than ever. The Carnegie Foundation called this morning. They want to schedule a site visit next week." "And Mrs. Orr's restitution?" "Her check for $30,000 arrived by messenger, along with a formal apology. She's also withdrawn from consideration for the Carnegie grant and resigned from the Housecraft League's board." Fritz's victory. That evening, as Fritz served dinner with the particular satisfaction of a man whose universe had been restored to proper order, I noticed the copper goose hanging in the kitchen. It still gleamed, but now with a softer light of metal that was remembering how to be useful rather than ornamental. "How long will it take?" I asked Fritz. "Months," he said without hesitation. "Maybe a year. But copper is patient. It will remember how to cook. how to hold heat, how to give flavor to what it touches. It will never be the same as before, but it will be honest again. Over dinner, a perfect coq au vin that seemed to celebrate the restoration of culinary integrity, Wolfe offered his final observation on the case. "The corruption of good intentions," he said, savoring both the wine and the irony, "is more dangerous than simple greed." Mrs. Orr convinced herself that her cause justified any method, that destroying someone else's work was protecting her own values. She weaponized cleanliness, turned sanitation into warfare, and corrupted an honest man's pride in his craft. He paused, considering the wine in his glass. But authenticity, like truth, resists such brutal sanitization. It may be temporarily obscured, but it cannot be erased without leaving traces of the violence done to it. And those traces, Archie, are often more revealing than the intended blankness. I raised my glass. To honest tarnish, and to the patient restoration of what zealots try to sterilize, Wolfe replied. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Honest noise from an honest world that didn't require industrial soap to justify its existence. Inside our brownstone, order had been restored through the careful application of truth to the stains that really matter. The copper goose hung in the kitchen, beginning its long journey back to usefulness. Some things, once damaged by excessive virtue, take time to heal. But they do heal, with patience and proper care. That's the thing about authentic flavor, and about well-seasoned justice. Both have a way of working their way back to the surface, no matter how much misguided scrubbing someone uses to try to wash them. Inspector Kramer arrived at 11:30 with his hat at the regulation angle and his jaw set for confrontation, which is his way of bringing both flowers and a subpoena. Fritz showed him in with the dignity he reserves for necessary evils, and Kramer took the red leather chair like it owed him money from a poker game he'd lost on purpose. "You've been busy," he said to Wolfe, not bothering with pleasantries. "The Ledger's running a piece about kitchen warfare and philanthropic sabotage. My phone's been ringing since dawn with people asking if Nero Wolfe prevented mass poisoning at a charity tasting." "Pfui," Wolfe said mildly, not looking up from his morning paper. "No one was poisoned. They were merely in danger of being bored to death by mediocrity disguised as virtue." Kramer grunted, which in his vocabulary covers everything from grudging respect to active irritation. "You going to give me the courtesy of a complete report, or do I have to read about it in Carson's column?" "The official resolution." Wolfe set down his paper with the deliberate precision he uses when the world forces him to explain the obvious. Mrs. Adelaine Orr of the Housecraft League gained access to the Blake Fund's training kitchen under false pretenses and directed an obsessively thorough employee, Everett Pike, to sanitize the facility beyond recognition and substitute inferior spice blends for authentic ones. Her purpose was to demonstrate that donors couldn't distinguish between genuine culinary education and sterile mediocrity, thereby discrediting her competition. "That's criminal fraud, trespass, and food tampering," Kramer observed. "Indeed. However, Miss Blake has elected to accept Mrs. Orr's written confession, formal apology, and substantial financial restitution rather than pursue criminal charges. Mrs. Orr has resigned from the Housecraft League's board and withdrawn from consideration for the Carnegie Foundation grant. Justice has been served with appropriate seasoning." Kramer studied Wolfe with the expression he reserves for trying to find the catch in a confession that's too neat. "And Pike?" Mr. Pike was manipulated by someone who understood that obsession can be as easily weaponized as greed. He has been offered a position with the Blake Fund where his compulsions will be properly channeled rather than exploited. Pike's redemption. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Everett Pike appeared at our door at 2 o'clock, looking like a man who had spent the intervening days examining his conscience with the same thoroughness he usually applied to kitchen surfaces. Fritz admitted him with the wariness of someone who still remembered industrial soap residue on sacred spices. But Pike's demeanor had changed. The rigid precision remained, but it was tempered now with something that looked remarkably like humility. "Mr. Wolfe," Pike said, settling into the client chair with careful movements. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the difference between cleaning and erasing, about the copper pot and its history." Wolfe inclined his head slightly, granting permission to continue. "I went home and looked at everything I'd cleaned over the years. My grandmother's cast-iron skillet. I'd scoured away 20 years of seasoning because I thought the black coating was unsanitary. My mother's wooden spoons. I'd bleached them white because I believed the stains were contamination. I destroyed their memories because I thought I was improving them." Fritz, who had been hovering near the kitchen door like a protective spirit, stepped forward with the particular gentleness he reserves for discussing crimes against cookware. "The seasoning on iron is not dirt, Mr. Pike. It is protection. It is flavor. It is the pot learning how to cook. To remove it is to make the pot forget its purpose." Pike nodded with the fervor of a convert who has discovered his former religion was built on sand. "Mrs. Orr knew exactly how to use me. She understood that I would see a task and want to execute it perfectly, completely, beyond what anyone expected. She turned my pride in my work into her weapon." "And now?" Wolfe asked. "Now I want to learn the difference between clean and sterile. Miss Blake has offered me a full-time position as Director of Sanitation and Facility Integrity. Chef Voss has agreed to teach me about proper seasoning, about when patina is protection and when it's neglect. I want to understand when polishing improves something and when it destroys it. The broader consequences." The afternoon brought a cascade of news that completed the circle of justice. Regina Blake called to report that the Carnegie Foundation had not only approved their expansion grant, but had specifically commended their commitment to authentic culinary education that respects both tradition and practical application. The Housecraft League, meanwhile, had lost 2 major donors who had been disturbed by reports of their former board members' unethical competitive practices. More satisfying was the news that 3 organizations Pike had unknowingly sabotaged were now collaborating on a joint program to teach practical authenticity. Cooking that was both accessible and genuine, clean but not sterile. Vern Carson's piece in the late edition struck exactly the right note, focusing on the cleanliness zealot and the taste of truth, while keeping Wolfe's involvement appropriately mysterious. He described Mrs. Orr as a woman who mistook donors for dolts and authenticity for affectation, and concluded with a line about an unnamed private investigator whose office smells of beer and justice. The original mystery solved. That evening, as Fritz served his magnificent cassoulet, a dish that bore the honest stains of proper browning and the complex flavors that come only from patient layering, I finally pressed Wolfe about the original mystery that had started this entire affair. "The goose," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen where it hung with its gradually softening gleam. "You never told me who polished it in the first place." Wolfe paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, considering. "You want a culprit for the crime that brought us the case. I want to close the file properly." He set down his fork and looked at me with the expression he uses when he's about to reveal something that should have been obvious all along. "Yesterday afternoon, while Fritz was at the fishmonger and you were out pursuing Mrs. Orr's associates, Theodore came down from the plant rooms. He had been working with a new copper fungicide and wanted to test its effectiveness on a larger surface before applying it to his orchid containers." I stared at him. "Theodore polished the goose?" Theodore applied his fungicide to the goose, not understanding that Fritz's carefully cultivated patina was not corrosion to be eliminated, but character to be preserved. When he realized his error, he was too embarrassed to confess. The timing of Pike's visit the following evening provided him with the perfect scapegoat. "And you knew this when?" "I suspected it immediately. Theodore's hands bore traces of the same copper polish when he served my beer that evening. I confirmed it when I found the container of fungicide in the plant room trash, carefully buried beneath orchid clippings." "Why didn't you say anything?" Wolfe's mouth twitched with something that might have been amusement. Because Theodore's mortification was punishment enough, and because his accident provided us with the perfect introduction to a case that needed solving. Sometimes the universe arranges its own invitations to justice. Philosophical conclusions. As the evening settled around us with the particular quiet that comes when order has been restored, Wolfe offered his final thoughts on the case. "The corruption of virtue," he said, savoring both the wine and the irony, "is always more dangerous than simple vice." Mrs. Orr convinced herself that her superior understanding of practical education justified any method, including the systematic destruction of competitors through fraudulent means. She weaponized cleanliness and turned an honest man's professional pride into an instrument of sabotage. He paused to appreciate Fritz's cassoulet, which had achieved that perfect balance between rustic appearance and sophisticated flavor that marks truly great cooking. But authenticity, like properly seasoned cast iron, resists such brutal treatment. It may be temporarily damaged, but it retains the capacity for restoration, and the process of restoration, when undertaken with patience and understanding, often results in something stronger than the original. I raised my glass. "To the patient rebuilding of what zealots try to sterilize." "And to the understanding," Wolfe replied, "that some stains are credentials, not failures." The brownstone's peace. Later, as I made my final rounds of the house, I found Fritz in the kitchen applying his evening oil treatment to the copper goose. The harsh gleam had continued to soften over the past few days, and in the right light, you could see the ghost of its former patina beginning to return. "How much longer?" I asked. "Months," Fritz said without hesitation. "Perhaps a year, but copper is patient. It will remember how to cook, how to hold heat properly, how to contribute its own subtle flavors to the dishes it helps create. It will never be exactly the same as before, but it will be honest again. Some things, once scrubbed too clean, take time to remember how to be useful. But with patience and proper care, they do remember. The copper would learn to cook again, Pike would learn to clean without erasing, and Mrs. Orr would learn that virtue imposed through deception is no virtue at all. That's the thing about authentic character, whether in copper pots, working kitchens, or human beings. It can be temporarily obscured by misguided improvement, but it cannot be permanently erased. Given time and gentle treatment, it works its way back to the surface, often stronger and more valuable than before. Outside, the city hummed with its usual honest chaos. The sound of knives against boards, pans settling on stoves, lives being seasoned by use. Inside our brownstone, order had been restored through the careful application of truth to the stains that really matter. The case was closed, justice had been served with appropriate garnish, and Fritz's kitchen was slowly healing from its violation. In the morning, there would be fresh coffee, perfectly prepared in vessels that knew their business, not because they were spotless, but because they were experienced. And if some other spotless angel ever comes around with a rag and a philosophy, we'll be ready, with a beer, a spoon, and the kind of patience that can tell the difference between clean and pure.